All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into cognitive behavioral therapy for depression. Um, we've all heard about CBT and how it's used to treat depression, but this is about like going beyond just the surface level stuff.
Mhm.
What are some of like the lesser known aspects of CBT and how can we apply those to really kind of break free from depression's grip?
It's amazing how CBT goes beyond just talking. It really delves into the mechanics of how our thoughts and feelings and actions are all interconnected.
Yeah, it's not just a think positive kind of approach, right?
Mm.
It seems like CBT is like a structured framework that actually helps you change those thought patterns.
Absolutely. One of CBT's fundamental principles is that our thoughts directly influence our emotions and behaviors. So if you're constantly thinking, I'm a failure, you're likely to feel hopeless and withdraw from things.
That makes sense. But changing those ingrained thought patterns can't be easy, right? How does CBT actually help make that happen?
Well, CBT therapists use a variety of techniques, and one of the most effective is what we call cognitive restructuring. So imagine someone struggling with low self-esteem, and they have a thought like, I'm not good enough. A CBT therapist would help them challenge that thought by asking questions like, what evidence do you have to support that thought? Or is there another way of looking at this situation?
So it's not just accepting those negative thoughts as facts, but learning to question them and look for different explanations.
Precisely. As you start to challenge those negative thoughts, you can replace them with more balanced and realistic ones. For instance, instead of thinking, I'm not good enough, you might reframe it as, I'm still learning and growing, and that's okay.
I see how that could be really empowering.
Yeah.
You're not just stuck with those negative thoughts, you actually have the power to change them.
That's the beauty of CBT. And another key technique is behavioral activation. This focuses on breaking that cycle of withdrawal and inactivity that's common in depression.
Okay, so how would that work for someone who's feeling depressed and isolating themselves? How does behavioral activation help?
Okay, so let's say you're spending most of your time in bed avoiding social situations and neglecting hobbies. Behavioral activation would involve gradually reintroducing pleasurable activities back into your routine. It might start with something small, like taking a shower or going for a short walk.
Yeah, baby steps. But that can feel like a real struggle when you're depressed. How do you motivate yourself to do those things when you just don't feel like it?
That's where the cognitive part of CBT comes in. By changing your thoughts about those activities, you can shift your motivation. For example, instead of thinking, I'm too tired to go for a walk, you might reframe it as, even a short walk will make me feel better.
So you're using your thoughts to kind of fuel your actions rather
Yeah.
than letting your feelings control your behavior. Interesting. Now, one of the sources mentioned CBT having a really big impact, not just on mental health, but on physical health as well. That was surprising to me. Can you talk more about that?
It is fascinating. One of the remarkable things about CBT is that it addresses the mind-body connection. Studies have shown that CBT can improve sleep, reduce chronic pain, and even boost the immune system.
Wow, that's impressive. It really highlights the link between our mental and physical well-being.
Exactly. And another technique that caught my eye was thought journaling. It sounds simple, but what are some tips for making it really effective? Consistency is key. Even 5 minutes a day can make a difference. Don't worry about making it perfect. Just get your thoughts and feelings down on paper and be as specific as possible. Instead of writing, I felt anxious, describe the situation, the thoughts that triggered your anxiety, and how you reacted.
So you're becoming a detective of your own mind.
Precisely. And as you start seeing patterns, you can start to develop strategies to manage those thoughts and emotions more effectively.
I can see how that could be a really valuable tool for self-awareness and growth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we touched on mindful meditation as a way to kind of detach from negative thoughts. I'll admit I've tried meditation before and my mind just races. Any advice for someone who struggles with that?
It's normal for your mind to wander, especially when you're first starting. The key is to approach it with curiosity and non-judgment. Just notice those thoughts, acknowledge them, and then gently redirect your attention back to your breath or whatever you're focusing on. It's like training a muscle. It takes practice.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know there are different types of mindful meditations. What are some examples?
You have guided meditations where someone leads you through a practice. There are walking meditations where you focus on your body as you move. And even mindful eating where you pay attention to the taste and texture and aroma of your food. It's about bringing that present moment awareness to whatever you're doing.
It's not just about sitting cross-legged on a cushion. It's something you can integrate into your daily life.
Exactly. And even a few minutes of mindful meditation each day can make a big difference in your ability to manage stress and racing thoughts.
Now, those behavioral experiments sound almost like doing science experiments on your own mind. Can you give us like a concrete example of how that might work?
Okay, let's say you have social anxiety and you're always worrying about what others think of you. A behavioral experiment might involve testing out that belief in a controlled setting. Maybe start by saying hello to a stranger or asking a coworker for help on a project.
That sounds terrifying for someone with social anxiety.
It can be challenging, but that's the point. By gradually exposing yourself to those situations, you start to gather evidence that goes against your negative beliefs. Maybe people are friendly and receptive, or maybe asking for help strengthens your connections rather than making you seem incompetent.
So you're using real-world experiences to kind of rewrite those negative scripts in your mind.
Exactly. It's a powerful way to build confidence and challenge those beliefs that are holding you back.
This is all so fascinating, and I can definitely see how it could be really transformative. I'm curious about the types of depression CBT can be used to treat.
One of the things that makes CBT so effective is its versatility. It's been shown to be helpful for a wide range of conditions like major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, seasonal affective disorder, and even postpartum depression.
That's quite a list. And I understand it's not just for treating depression, but it's also used for anxiety disorders, phobias, and even chronic pain management, right?
That's right. CBT is a very adaptable approach. It can be tailored to address a wide range of mental and physical health issues. But I'm sure our listeners are wondering how effective CBT really is.
Yeah, that's what I'm really interested to hear more about. What does the research say? Is it really as effective as people claim it to be?
The good news is that CBT has a strong evidence base. Studies have shown that it's as effective as medication for treating mild to moderate depression and incredibly effective at preventing relapse.
It's amazing. I always thought medication was like the go-to solution for depression. This is really eye-opening.
It's important to remember that it doesn't have to be one or the other. For some people, a combination of CBT and medication might be the best approach, especially for severe depression.
It's about finding the right treatment plan for each person, and CBT is definitely a powerful tool to have in that toolbox.
Absolutely. And one of the things that makes CBT so appealing is that the benefits can last a long time. The skills learned in therapy are tools you can use throughout your life to help you manage difficult situations and maintain your mental well-being long after therapy ends.
It's not just a quick fix. It's about empowering people to take control of their mental health in the long run. That's a really great aspect of this approach.
It really is. It's about giving you the tools and techniques to become your own therapist in a way.
That's fantastic.
It really is.
So for someone listening to this thinking, CBT sounds promising, but where do I even start? What advice would you give them?
The first step is reaching out to a qualified mental health professional who specializes in CBT.
And how would someone find a CBT therapist?
Your primary care physician can usually provide a referral. You can also search online directories or even explore online therapy platforms, which are becoming increasingly popular these days.
So there are options for both in-person and online therapy.
Exactly. It's important to find a therapist who specifically focuses on CBT and has experience treating the issues you're facing. So, for instance, if you're struggling with depression, you'd want to find a therapist with a proven track record of helping people with depression.
Yeah, you want to make sure you're working with someone who's qualified and someone you feel comfortable with.
Definitely. The therapist-client relationship is really important in CBT. It's a collaborative process, and you need to feel like you can trust your therapist and be open and honest with them.
It's a partnership like we were talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the positives of CBT, but are there any limitations or drawbacks we should be aware of?
It's important to remember that CBT isn't a magic solution. It takes effort and commitment from the person going through it. It's not just venting your feelings. It's about actively working to change your thoughts and behaviors, which can be challenging at times.
Yeah, it's not a passive process.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to put in the work.
Exactly. And for some people, CBT might not be the best fit. Some individuals might find other forms of therapy, like psychodynamic therapy or interpersonal therapy, to be more helpful.
It's about finding the right approach for each person. And for those who want to try out some CBT techniques at home, are there any exercises they can try?
Absolutely. Thought journaling is a great place to start. Even if you're not seeing a therapist, you can benefit from just regularly writing down your thoughts and feelings. It can help you become more aware of those thought patterns that might be contributing to your depression.
And you mentioned earlier about practicing gratitude being a helpful way to combat negative thoughts.
Oh yeah, definitely. Taking a few minutes each day to just reflect on the things you appreciate in your life, big or small, can really shift your perspective and boost your mood.
And for those who are really struggling and feeling overwhelmed, please remember, you don't have to go through this alone. There are resources available, and reaching out for professional help can make a world of difference.
I completely agree. There is hope, and with the right support, you can overcome these challenges and build a brighter future for yourself.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into CBT, but we're just getting started.
There's so much more to explore, and we'll be diving deeper into those CBT techniques in our next segment.
All right, so we're back, and we're ready to really get into the nuts and bolts of how these CBT techniques work in practice. Can you give us some specific examples of how this stuff actually plays out?
Absolutely. These techniques are more than just abstract ideas. They're really practical tools that you can use to kind of rewire your thinking and change your whole experience.
Okay, so let's start with cognitive restructuring. We talked about it conceptually, but how does a therapist actually help someone challenge those deep-seated negative thoughts?
So let's imagine you're working with a CBT therapist and you share a thought like, ugh, I'm such a mess. I totally blew that project deadline at work.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just spiral into self-criticism in those moments.
Exactly. And a good CBT therapist wouldn't just offer empty platitudes or tell you to think positive. They would guide you through a process of examining that thought more critically.
Okay, so walk me through that process. What would that look like in a therapy session?
Well, they might start by asking questions like, what evidence do you have to support that thought that you're a complete mess? Or, is this thought actually helpful, or is it just making you feel worse?
It's like you're holding that thought up to a mirror and really scrutinizing it.
Exactly. And as you start to kind of break down that thought, you might realize that it's based on an overgeneralization, or maybe you're blowing the situation out of proportion. One mistake doesn't make you a failure.
Right. It's about seeing that missed deadline in a more balanced and realistic way. It doesn't mean you're a complete failure as a person.
Right. And then the therapist might help you come up with some alternative thoughts that are more helpful.
So instead of, I'm a mess, it might be something like, okay, I made a mistake, I've learned from it, and I'll do things differently next time.
Exactly. It's about shifting from that negative self-defeating thought to a more positive, growth-oriented one.
That makes a lot of sense. What about behavioral activation? I'm still not quite clear on how that works in real life.
So picture this. You're feeling depressed and you're withdrawing from activities you used to enjoy. You're spending most of your time at home feeling sluggish and unmotivated.
Yeah, like you're stuck in this rut and it's hard to see a way out.
That's a good way to put it. And behavioral activation is about gently nudging you out of that rut by gradually reintroducing enjoyable activities back into your life.
Okay, but what if you just don't have the energy or the motivation to do those things? Isn't that kind of a hallmark of depression?
It is, and that's where those cognitive techniques we were talking about come in. Behavioral activation isn't about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about starting small, choosing activities that are meaningful to you, and then using those cognitive restructuring techniques to challenge the thoughts that are keeping you stuck.
So, for example, if you're telling yourself, I'm too tired to go for a walk, you might reframe it as, even a short walk might give me a little energy boost.
Exactly. You're basically using your thoughts to kind of fuel your actions instead of letting your feelings dictate your behavior.
I like that. It's like you're hacking your own brain to break free from those negative patterns. Now, we touched on thought journaling before, but I'm really intrigued by this idea of becoming a detective of your own mind. Can you give me a real-life example of how thought journaling might help someone uncover those unhelpful thought patterns?
Sure. Let's say you struggle with social anxiety. You overthink social situations and worry a lot about what others think of you.
That's super common, and I can imagine it can be pretty debilitating.
It can be. So imagine you get invited to a party, and immediately your mind starts racing with all these anxious thoughts, like, what if I say something stupid? What if people judge me? What if I don't know anyone there?
Ugh, yeah, I've been there. It's so easy to spiral into that negativity.
Right. But instead of letting those thoughts run wild, you decide to grab your thought journal and just write it all down. Describe the situation, the invitation to the party, and then really try to capture all those anxious thoughts that are swirling around in your head.
It's like you're taking those thoughts out of your head and putting them on paper.
Yes. And as you're writing them down, you might start to see some common themes or patterns emerge. Maybe you realize that you have a tendency to catastrophize, always imagining the worst case scenario.
Oh.
Or maybe you notice that you're engaging in mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking, even though you have no real proof.
It's like you're shining a light on those automatic negative thoughts that were hiding in the shadows before.
Exactly. And once you've identified those patterns, you can start to challenge them. Ask yourself, is this thought really true? What evidence do I have to support it? Is there another way of looking at this situation?
So you're basically using thought journaling as a tool for cognitive restructuring.
You got it. You're becoming more aware of those automatic negative thoughts, and you're learning to question them, challenge them, and replace them with more balanced and realistic ones.
That's so powerful. It's like you're taking back control of your own mind.
It is, and the more you do this, the better you get at catching those negative thoughts before they spiral out of control.
Now, one of the sources you shared mentioned a technique called ABC analysis, which sounds interesting. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. ABC analysis is a key part of CBT that helps you understand the link between your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The A stands for the activating event, which is basically the trigger or the situation that sets things off.
So let's say the activating event is getting negative feedback from your boss.
Perfect example. Now, the B stands for your beliefs about that event. These are the thoughts and interpretations that shape your emotional and behavioral response.
So my beliefs might be I'm not good at my job, or my boss is disappointed in me.
Exactly, and those beliefs lead to the C, which stands for the consequences.
Which could be feelings of sadness or shame or anxiety, or behaviors like withdrawing from colleagues or procrastinating on work.
That's right. So ABC analysis helps you see how your thoughts drive your feelings and behaviors. It's like a formula for understanding your reactions.
I see how that could be really helpful for breaking those negative cycles. Instead of just reacting automatically, you can pause, identify your beliefs, and choose a more constructive response.
Precisely. And that's what CBT is all about, empowering you to become more aware of your thoughts. Challenge those unhelpful thoughts, and then choose healthier ways of thinking and behaving.
Now let's talk about mindful meditation.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm one of those people whose mind just won't quiet down. Do you have any tips for someone who struggles with meditation?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind or stopping all thoughts. It's more about noticing those thoughts without judgment, acknowledging them, and then gently guiding your attention back to your breath or whatever you're focusing on.
Okay, so it's not about fighting those thoughts. It's about observing them without getting swept away by them.
Exactly. There are many different ways to practice. Some people find it helpful to focus on their breath, while others prefer to focus on body sensations or sounds around them.
So it's about finding what works best for you.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to do it.
Exactly. And remember, it's called a practice for a reason. It takes time and patience to cultivate that mindful awareness. But even just a few minutes of mindful meditation each day can have a big impact on your ability to handle stress, reduce anxiety, and develop a sense of inner peace.
Now, those behavioral experiments we were talking about earlier, it's almost like you're conducting scientific experiments on your own mind. Can you give us a more detailed example of how that might work in a real-life situation?
Okay, so let's say you have a fear of public speaking. It triggers a lot of anxiety and negative thoughts for you.
That's a really common fear, and one that can really hold people back.
Definitely. So a behavioral experiment might involve gradually exposing yourself to public speaking situations in a controlled way. Maybe start by just practicing your presentation in front of a mirror just to get used to hearing your own voice and seeing yourself speak.
Okay, baby steps. I like it.
Then you can try practicing in front of a close friend or family member, someone who can give you supportive feedback and help you build your confidence.
So you're creating a safe space to practice and challenge those fears.
Exactly. And as you start to feel more confident, you might try joining a public speaking group or volunteering to give a presentation at work. The key is to gradually increase the difficulty as you start to see yourself succeed in those smaller steps.
So you're using those real-world experiences to kind of rewrite that script in your mind that says, I can't do this.
Precisely. You're gathering evidence to disprove those negative beliefs and build a new, more empowering story about what you're capable of.
That's awesome. Now, I know we're really getting into the details here, but there's one more technique I wanted to unpack that was mentioned in one of the sources, role-playing. How does that fit into CBT?
Role-playing is a great way to practice new behaviors and coping skills in a safe environment. It's like a dress rehearsal for those tricky real-life interactions.
So can you give us a specific example of how role-playing might be used in therapy?
Sure. Let's say you struggle with being assertive. You find it hard to say no to requests, and then you end up feeling resentful or overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've definitely been there.
It is. So in a role-playing scenario, your therapist might play the role of a colleague asking you to take on an extra project, and you would practice setting boundaries and asserting your needs in a clear and respectful way.
It's a way to try out different approaches and see what feels comfortable and effective for you without any real-world consequences.
Exactly. And role-playing can also be helpful for processing past experiences or working through difficult emotions.
Yeah.
Like if you're struggling to forgive someone who hurt you, You might role play a conversation with that person, even if they're not physically present.
That's interesting. It's like a way to have those conversations that you haven't been able to have and maybe find some closure.
It can be. It's a powerful tool for exploring different perspectives, processing emotions, and practicing new ways of relating to yourself and others.
Well, we covered a lot of ground here. It's really fascinating to see how these techniques can be applied to so many different issues.
It is. And the great thing about CBT is that it's so flexible and can be adjusted to meet each person's individual needs.
Now, I'm sure some of our listeners might be thinking, this all sounds good, but how do I know if CBT is right for me? What advice would you give them?
Well, that's a good question. CBT isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's not going to be the best fit for everyone.
So how can someone figure out if it's a good match for their personality and their needs?
One important thing to consider is whether you're comfortable with a structured and goal-oriented approach to therapy. CBT is very action-focused, and it involves homework assignments and putting in the work to change your thoughts and behaviors.
So it's not just about talking about your feelings and hoping things will get better on their own.
Right. It's about being actively involved in your healing process.
And it's important to remember that CBT is a collaborative process.
Right. Absolutely. You're not just passively following your therapist's instructions. You're working together as a team to figure out your goals, come up with strategies, and track your progress.
It's a partnership like we talked about earlier.
That's right. And finding the right therapist is super important. You want to find someone who you connect with, who gets your needs, and who can create a safe and supportive space for you to work through those tough thoughts and feelings.
What about those people who are hesitant to try therapy because of the stigma or because they're worried about what other people might think?
I understand those concerns, but it's so important to remember that taking care of your mental health is a sign of strength, not weakness. There's no shame in asking for professional help, and it shows that you're committed to your own well-being.
That's a really important message. We need to break down those barriers and make it normal to talk about mental health.
I agree. And before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to emphasize that CBT is a journey, not a destination. It's a process of continuous learning, growth, and self-discovery.
That's a great point. It's not about reaching some state of perfect mental health. It's about developing those skills and building the resilience to handle life's ups and downs with more awareness and compassion.
Exactly. It's about embracing the journey and knowing that setbacks are normal and celebrating those small victories along the way.
I love that. Well, I feel like I've learned so much about CBT today.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's such an empowering approach, and I could see how it could be life-changing for so many people.
It really can be. It's about giving you the tools to become the architect of your own mind and build a richer, more meaningful life.
On that note, let's take a quick break and we'll come back to wrap up all of these amazing insights and see what they mean for you, our listeners. All right, so we're back. And it's time to put all the pieces together. We've talked about the main ideas behind CBT, got through a bunch of techniques, and even tried out some at-home exercises. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think for me, it's that CBT really changes how you see things. You realize that you actually have the power to change how you think and feel, even when things are tough. It's not about pretending those negative thoughts and emotions aren't there. It's more about learning to handle them better.
It's like you're taking control of that story that's playing in your head instead of just being along for the ride on that crazy emotional roller coaster.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really cool about CBT is that it's not just some fluffy theory. It's based on tons of research, and there's so much evidence that it works for treating all sorts of mental health issues, including depression.
And it's not just about treating what's already there, but also about preventing it from coming back, which is huge. Once you learn these skills, they're yours for life.
Yeah.
It's like having a mental health toolkit that you can use whenever you need it.
You got it. CBT gives you the tools and strategies to deal with those ups and downs in life with more resilience and control.
You know, one of the things that really struck me was how important the relationship between the therapist and the client is in CBT. It's not just about sitting there and getting information from some expert. It's more like a team effort.
Absolutely. The therapist is there to guide you and support you on your journey, not to boss you around or judge you. It's about working together to figure out those negative thought patterns, come up with ways to cope and reach your goals.
So finding a therapist that you feel good with, someone you trust and who really gets you, is super important for CBT to work.
It's essential. You need to have that safe and comfortable space where you can talk about those tough thoughts and feelings without shame or judgment.
Now, I know some people might be a little unsure about trying CBT. They might think it's too rigid or too clinical. But from what we've talked about, it seems like there's actually a lot of room for making it your own and being flexible within that structure.
That's a really common misconception. While CBT does have a structure, it's also very adaptable. The techniques can be adjusted to fit your specific needs and goals, and the sessions themselves are super interactive and engaging. It's not like sitting through boring lectures. It's more about actively participating and learning skills that you can use in your everyday life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And even if you're not dealing with a mental health issue right now, some of the stuff we've talked about, like thought journaling, mindfulness, and gratitude, can be really helpful for anyone who wants to feel better mentally and be more resilient.
Those are all great ways to cultivate a more positive outlook, handle stress better, and just navigate the challenges of life with more grace.
A lot of what we've discussed today really resonates with me, and I bet our listeners are feeling the same way. But what happens when CBT ends? How do you keep those positive changes going and stop those negative thoughts from coming back?
That's a great question. One of the main goals of CBT is to teach you how to manage your mental health on your own, even after therapy is over. You basically learn how to be your own therapist.
I love that.
And a good CBT therapist will help you create a plan to prevent those setbacks, which involves identifying your triggers, developing coping skills, and building a support system.
So it's not about becoming dependent on the therapist. It's about learning to take care of your mental well-being yourself.
Right. And remember, it's totally normal to have setbacks.
Right.
If you find yourself slipping back into old patterns, don't beat yourself up about it. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you might need a little extra help to get back on track.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into CBT for depression, what's the most important message you want to leave our listeners with?
I want people to know that they have the power to change how they think and feel. CBT gives you the tools and support to challenge those negative thoughts, replace them with healthier, more realistic ones, and ultimately create a life that's more fulfilling and meaningful.
That's a great message. And to our listeners, if you're feeling overwhelmed by depression, please know that there's hope. CBT can be a guide to help you find a brighter, more empowered future.
It's a journey worth taking.
And with that, we'll leave you to think about everything we've talked about today. Maybe it's time to examine those beliefs that might be holding you back and see if starting your own CBT journey is the right move for you. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.